very excited to introduce Jorge, our speaker for today. So Jorge, he is a natural resource specialist at Anacostia Watershed Society in Bladensburg. They don't just work out of Maryland, they also work on Anacostia River restoration within the whole watershed, which includes both DC and Maryland. Jorge is like the jack of all trades in terms of ecological restoration along the Anacostia watershed. Does tree plantings, meadow restorations, SAV, the subaquatic vegetation propagation, mussel propagation, wildlife monitoring, invasive plant management. He really does it all. Today, he's going to be talking to us about wild rice restorations within the Anacostia River watershed. Before he worked in our region, he actually worked in Costa Rica, where he is from. He got his bachelor's degree from San Jose and worked on issues related to tropical biodiversity conservation within that area before coming and bringing his expertise into the DC region. So very excited to hear from him today. I'll also tease that we will have a field trip associated with this topic on August 16th. It's not on the website yet. We're finalizing some details, but we'll go out and see some of the sites that Jorge will talk about during his presentation. So with that, Jorge, you want to take over?
Yep. Thank you very much, Bradley and the Maryland Native Plant Society. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending this presentation. So yeah, I will be talking about our wetland restoration work at the Anacostia Watershed Society, particularly focused on wild rice, which has been a keystone species for us. Let me go through the next. I usually have issues sliding at the beginning of the presentation. Let me try. Okay, right there. So basically at the Anacostia Watershed Society, we were founded in 1989, and we envisioned the Anacostia Watershed as an inspired model of urban river conservation and management. Most of the people in this world live in cities these days, and finding that balance, that coexistence between rivers, biodiversity and cities, I think is key. And that's what we're trying to do at the Anacostia Watershed Society, which includes our watershed is 176 square miles, including parts of Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and the eastern half of DC. And as you can see, it's a tiny speck in the greater Potomac River watershed and the Chesapeake Bay drainage. Basically, being about 60% of the watershed is on the coastal plain, so it's flat land with sandy soils, sandy, silty soils. So lots of wetlands historically, but also we have lost a lot of wetlands, over 6,500 acres of wetlands in the last 60 plus years. The Anacostia River itself goes for 8.5 miles from the Hyattsville area, where the Northwest Branch meets the Northeast Branch, to DC, where it meets the Potomac River, right across from Haines Point, if you know that area of the city. So a lot of the wetlands you see, the vast majority of the wetlands you see in the tidal portion of the river are man-made. And the river has, we'll focus today on the freshwater tidal marshes, which is the wild rice's favorite habitat. But we also have a lot of other types of wetlands, including seepage swamps that have sweet bay magnolia, sedges, skunk cabbage. We have riparian forested wetlands, which were previously dominated by ash trees in the Fraxinas genus. Of course, they got completely wiped out because of the emerald ash borer, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And actually, that picture shows a group of volunteers planting trees, and you can see the pieces of timber of the dead ash trees that were affected by the invasive pest. And we have globally rare terrace gravel magnolia bogs near the fall line, which almost goes parallel to the Montgomery County Prince George's County line, and vernal pools, which we're currently doing an inventory of vernal pools on the Prince George's County side of the Anacostia watershed. Basically, wetlands are the kidneys of the Anacostia watershed, or any watershed where they are. They cycle nutrients, they intercept and filter pollutants, sediment, toxics. Plants are great are intercepting toxic substances. You know, we have other natural filters like the freshwater mussels that we do a lot of work with. Although mussels can get so far, once you get heavy metals or high ammonia, they die simply. Wild rice and other plants, they can take a lot of nasty stuff without dying. Wetlands are absolutely amazing for flood control, as fish nurseries and to sustain fisheries, for biodiversity in general, of course, and for recreational, scientific, and cultural values. And I'll talk more about the cultural significance of wild rice. Actually, some of the biggest stores of soil carbon in the biosphere are in wetlands. 20 to 30% of their total soil carbon is in wetlands. Why is that? Because that wet environment with low oxygen conditions slows decomposition and lead to the accumulation of organic matter, preserving all that carbon right there in that wet environment. And freshwater wetlands, according to new research, are pretty important. As a matter of fact, more than tidal saltwater wetlands. And we have some remarkable wildlife. Beavers, which are engineers, ecosystem engineers. That's me playing Steve Irwin with the snapping turtle. We have long-nosed gar, which is a prehistoric fish. And mussels, which are, like I said, another natural filters. A mussel of that size, this is an eastern elliptio, can filter between 10 and 20 gallons of water in a day. A little bit about the issues in these tidal wetlands. First one is the resident Canada geese. Basically, there's like 11 subspecies of Canada geese. In our area, we have, well, at least in DC, we have a couple. The resident Canada geese were introduced from Wisconsin and other Midwestern areas back in the 30s and 40s for hunting related purposes. And they don't migrate where they are native, they are resident. And especially here, they have no reason whatsoever to migrate because it's even milder. The winters are milder than in Wisconsin. We do have a native subspecies that does migrate to Canada and northern latitudes during the summer. So any geese you see in our area on a grassy area in midsummer is a resident subspecies. And these are the ones that cause a lot of trouble in the Anacostia River for decades. They eat all the wild rice. Actually, wild rice is one of their favorite species, leaving only mudflats. Mudflats are good, right, for shorebirds and some species, but historically, the Anacostia tidal emergent wetlands were dominated by vegetation. There were thick, marshy areas. I always like to tell people that it's just like Jug Bay in the Patuxent River. When you go to Jug Bay, that's what the Anacostia used to look like back in the day. So that has been our sort of our reference ecosystem for restoration. Another issue that we have is the emerald ash borer. Like I mentioned, you can see this area taken at Bladensburg Waterfront Park before and after. So the picture on top was taken, they're not taken at the exact same sites, but roughly the same areas. So the upper picture is from 2011 when there were no, I think the pest might have been around then, but the damage wasn't evident. But then in 2017, you can see all the dead ash trees. And we're talking even including some specimen trees that died. So pretty much all the mature trees died. Locally, what we have is the seedlings and saplings, and is showing more and more that they are not showing any signs of damage or of new damage. So we think the worst of the infestation is over, although we don't know. Even scientists, for example, Dr. Andrew Baldwin from the University of Maryland and other researchers are taking a look at that to see what's the deal. Some people have released, or agencies like Maryland Department of Agriculture, the USDA have released biocontrols, which are species of parasitoid wasps that kill the emerald ash borer. And we believe those are being efficacious here in this because we see big saplings of ash trees, including some that were affected by emerald ash borer, but they are not showing any new signs of damage, which is encouraging. And as you can see, the damage in this area at Anacostia Park, just entire areas that were 80% plus ash tree canopy were decimated. So what are we doing? So in general, our wetland restoration work has focused on the propagation of wild rice and American lotus. I'm really happy to announce that. That's a new thing for us that we just got started, and so far we have had some encouraging results. Phragmites control, tree planting in areas impacted by emerald ash borer, and vernal pool inventory, like I mentioned. Now we have propagated other species of wetland plants like pickerel weed, arrow arum, but these days we're just focusing on these two, wild rice and American lotus. Again, the resident Canada geese population was the big headache for us for many years. At some point, we had over 600 birds at least in the DC portion of the Anacostia River, and they caused a lot of issues in the marsh vegetation. So we did population counts in partnership with the National Park Service, which are still ongoing, but now they are led by National Park Service. We help with non-lethal control, goose egg oiling, and then the National Park Service with the DC Department of the Environment partner with USDA APHIS to do lethal control, which has been going for the last, I want to say like 4 or 5 years, and it has been pretty effective. I think now we are around 80 birds, give or take, from over 600 back in the day. And the change has been remarkable. Areas that were mudflats are now marsh, thick marsh, and the wild rice is expanding, and I'll talk more about that. Before, we had to fence any planting we did. Do you see those circles? Those are our plots or little corrals. So basically, we had to build fencing corrals of about 900, 1,000 square feet before doing any planting, because any wild rice planting or any other planting of using wetland species that are palatable to the geese were wiped. So we had to do the fencing. And why? How does this work? Basically, geese are funny. They are like airplanes. They need big areas to land and to take off. Unlike the mallards are like helicopters. They can land anywhere, but geese need big areas. That's why they love those big grassy areas, like golf courses, for example. Wild rice is a very unique grass species in the Poaceae family. It is well, some people may include it in a different tribe, but it's mostly included in the Oryzae tribe, which includes the regular rice that we all know. Although they are pretty different in terms of their qualities as a grain. There's 4 species of wild rice worldwide. They botanists think that is possibly of North American origin, and the North American eastern divergence happened about more than 3 million years ago. So it's a monoecious plant, so both sexes are in the same plant, in the same flowers or panicles. There's 4 species, like I mentioned. So northern wild rice is Zizania palustris. That's the one you get at the grocery store. It's gonna have a thicker grain. That's why it's a more commercial species for culinary purposes. The one in the picture is our eastern wild rice, Zizania aquatica. Is mostly found, and I'll show you their distribution map on the eastern east coast, pretty much. There's a third species of rice that is actually listed, is rare, and or I think it's can't remember if it's endangered or threatened. Is the Texas wild rice, Zizania tejana. Is a perennial species, actually native to very small area in central Texas. And right here, you can see the distribution maps, at least based on research grade observations from my naturalist. You see Zizania palustris on the left. You see it's mostly around the Great Lakes and New England, and they are sympatric. Both species overlap in the Great Lakes region, but our eastern wild rice, again, is mostly found along the eastern seaboard from Florida to New England. Wild rice has a long history in North America. It was widely used by several ethnic groups, Native American native groups. Ojibwe in Ojibwe is known as manumin. Other names, Canada rice, Indian rice, and water oats, and other names. We mostly know it as wild rice. So it has been a food staple for many indigenous people: Dakota, Menominee, Ojibwa, Omaha, Ponca, Winnebago, and the Potawatomi people. The grain is mostly what is eaten mostly here in North America is the grain, but in the Chinese species is all the stem is also eaten. Again, here mostly the grain, and it is considered a cereal, a grain, not a rice per se, even though they are it is distantly related with the regular white rice or Oryza sativa. And it's actually more nutritious. It is high in both protein and fiber, and at least the Zizania aquatica or eastern wild rice is very productive. These species are in general very productive, especially the annual species like our eastern wild rice. They can produce over 500 pounds per acre. And you can see some illustrations of Native Americans harvesting the wild rice, and they even use some pouches to collect it. There's on the use by Native Americans, there's not as much evidence due to the fact that the artifacts they use were pretty biodegradable, like pieces of wooden sticks and such. So there's not as much archaeological evidence of the use in pre-colonial times and such. And our eastern wild rice is known as Zizania aquatica, variety aquatica. That's our local wild rice here in the DMV area. It is an annual emergent obligate wetland plant. It only occurs in wetland conditions. It loves the sort of the headwaters of the large rivers, so where you have tidal freshwater wetland systems. That's its favorite habitat. It can grow in non-tidal conditions, but it just thrives better in the freshwater tidal habitats. And it can be a big plant, and being a C4, a grass species, it just grows super fast and very tall, over 12 feet tall in some cases when it's in its right habitat. It produces these beautiful inflorescence that are called panicles. And on the upper side, let me show you. Yeah, I guess so the upper part is the female flowers, and those are the ones that become the grains. And the lower part that are really showy yellow-green flowers, those are the male flowers on the bottom. The grains are long, they can be like 2 inches, and they have awns, which are like long needles. And I'll show you a closer picture of that. Phenology is mostly right now is growing. Some may even start the blooming, but June to October is pretty much. By October, the plant is mostly died back because by then it has already produced and dropped all the grain. And you can get as many as 14,000 seeds per pound. So again, a very productive seed. One thing that I wanna highlight here, even though this is for a salt water marsh, not a freshwater marsh, is the substrate elevation, because that's very important in wetlands. So you have the high elevation, high substrate elevation marsh, or just high marsh. That's an area that receives the least amount of inundation, is of course higher. I call it like the mountains of the marsh. And that's where you're gonna see your cattails, the invasive Phragmites, they thrive in that high marsh area. And as you go down waterward, you're gonna get the mid-marsh area, and then the low marsh area that gets more inundation. Remember that the Anacostia River is a tidal freshwater river, so we get the low tides, high tides every day. And the wild rice thrives in the mid to low marsh, in that area where you see the yellow area. That's the sweet spot for wild rice. It can grow in the other areas, but it really thrives in the mid to low marsh. So these are the grains. Again, they have that long needle-like structure, which is called the awn, A-W-N, awn, botanically. And the one in the picture below is a peel grain. So basically, in order to eat it, for example, you have to remove that membrane, that coat, that seed coat, and that's the nutritious part, what you see on a background of fabric. And why the awn is just the same as the mangrove trees. If you have been to Florida or tropical parts of the world, you're gonna see that the red mangrove has these long seed pods that fall and get nailed into the mud. That's exactly what happens with the wild rice on a miniature scale. And that's how it gets dispersed. Once it gets going, it's a wonderful self-seeder. It just keep growing and growing and growing. One of our former co-workers, the one that started the work, this wild rice propagation, Steve McKinley Ward, some of you might know him. He planted wild rice in a ditch that is part of the FEMA floodway right across the street from our office in Bladensburg. And to this day, that population has been self-sustaining just by seeding. And that happened over a decade ago, just to give you an idea. And it's not only wild rice, it's actually an interesting plant community with different species. We have a couple of barnyard grasses, Echinocloa, very common in the marshy areas, although one is non-native, at least. Rice cutgrass, which is a native, is a wonderful species, and it does have the edge of the leaf blade has a very spiky edge, and it does have the hairy node. Some of you folks might be familiar with Virginia cutgrass, more of a woodland species. It has the same ring of hairs. And then pickerel weed. Pontederia cordata is a very interesting species, and you can see that crab spider trying to camouflage with the colors, the yellow-green colors of the flower, trying to wait for a pollinator to come by. Why? Because pickerel weed is an amazing pollinator plant. It attracts a lot of different species of bees and other insects. And according to Sam Drogi, our bee expert, he said that there's like 3 species that are mostly dependent on pickerel weed. And one of them, I forgot the name, was collected last in the DC area like 90 years ago or so. And Aroerum, Peltandra virginica, is one of the most abundant species. Why is that? Because the geese don't like to eat it. That's why it thrived even during the worst of the geese population. So it's pretty much an overabundant species, but it is a great species. It has a lot of value in the ecosystem. It is actually called duck corn. That's one of the common names. And why do the geese don't like to eat it? Because it has those chemicals in the sap, the calcium oxalates, that are pretty much like microscopic broken glass. So it's irritant for the tissues. And one of my favorites, duck potato, Sagittaria latifolia. It has those tubers not shown in the picture, only flowers and fruits, but the tubers are considered edible, and actually they were widely used by Native Americans. The smooth beggar ticks, or Biden's laevis, is one of the most common flowering plants in the fall, and one of my favorites. And this one is one of the most common, and it sort of behaves like a pioneer. And I say that because I've seen those areas that were mudflats for many years due to the goose grazing pressure. The first plant that colonizes those mudflats post goose management is the smartweed, Persicaria punctata. What does that mean, punctata? Dotted. And you can see in the perianth, you can see I edited this picture to give it a contrast. So you can see the tiny glandular dots that are characteristic of the species, as well as the estipule, the ochre, with the long kind of hairs right there. Nufar spatter duck, it's very common species in the low marsh. So it's a really water-loving species. So it's in the lower part of the marsh. It takes a lot of inundation. And it's interesting because it can start submerged, and it can behave like a lotus, like with floating leaves. But eventually it becomes an emergent, like most of our marsh plants. And the flower is that nice yellow button. What do we do with the rice? Basically, we bag the seeds using Tyvek bags. We use that material that they use for like the walls, the dry walls and such, Tyvek. And we bag the panicles, like several plants or several stems at a time, zip tie them, leave them there for 2 to 3 weeks to let the grain ripen. And after that time, we harvested, we collected, we stored wet in refrigeration until the spring. And in the spring, we start the mud balling. We can also do the propagation in nursery wet beds, although really the most cost efficient is mud balling. If you do it at the right time, just look at the last picture, the third picture on the right. Just by looking at the background vegetation, I can see it's around March. That's the great time, especially early March is a perfect time for mud balling. And what is mothballing? Basically mix the mud, the muck, the substrate from the wetland with the seed until it looks kind of like cow dung, and then you can broadcast it by hand. Pretty easy and fun. And you can see some of the patterns post-seedling. This is about April, mid to late April. And you can see some people perhaps throw a bunch that didn't disperse a lot. So you can see a clump and then more dispersed clumps, depending on the skills of the seeder. And again, because of the goose grazing pressure, we always had to put fencing. That's not the case anymore. Actually, we have been in the process of removing that fence, which is a lot of work. Just one of the T-posts that you see, the steel T-post, is 10 pounds. I weighed half a ton per acre in one area that had, was very densely fenced, half a ton per acre of fencing material that we used to take to our recycling facility. And look at this picture with the sky on the background. It looks, you can see the male flowers on the bottom, more like yellow greenish, and then on top the female flowers. In this case, these are the grains that are already growing. They're in green, they're unripe yet. So these are examples of areas where we propagate wild rice. This is Langston Golf Course at Kingman Lake or Kingman Marsh in DC. So in the picture on the left, you can see we did some perennial plantings closer to the water side. And then on the next, during the next year in the spring, we seeded the wild rice. And then by 2020, you can see the nice cover. Right now it's about 2-acre area of solid wild rice. And something that we noted is that during the late in the pandemic year in 2020, the populations started growing a lot. And we were amazed by that. And I talked to Greg Kearns from Jog Bay, who some of you might know. He has been a great counsel and advisor for wild rice to the Anacostia Watershed Society for many years. Actually, he got us started in the wild rice restoration. So anyway, I talked to Greg, and he said the same. During 2020, they saw the same. The wild rice was thriving really well, and their geese population had even been controlled way back, even before the Anacostia geese population. So I don't know, something happened during 2020 that that made conditions better. Of course, in the Anacostia River had been subject to goose population control, so we can attribute a lot of that to that. But it's interesting that it happens at both locations. And for example, in 2022, we measured 10 acres of wild rice on the left here. And then last year, in the same area, 26 acres. And some people reported population. We saw also other populations along the main stem of the river. So the rice is just thriving with less geese pressure and perhaps other factors at play, but it is doing pretty well. And we have been doing this mapping. We're going to continue to do this mapping this year. Something else that we do is the Phragmites control. This is hard work. We have done different kinds of methods, from mechanical to herbiciding, which are the most common. This year, we started with also in partnership with Action, is an ecological restoration company. So at River Terrace, we started doing solarization, which is new to me for the wetland environment. I've done solarization in my garden or in when we had a meadow project. So I've done it in terrestrial ecosystem, but never in a wetland. So far, it's looking pretty good. Solarization is normally a pretty effective method. although in this case it's a lot of work. With the help of Action and their employees, we were able to mow all the Phragmites reeds flush to the ground and install the thick tarp to pretty much cook and kill the the Phragmites underneath. So American lotus again has been a great addition. I gotta say that we tried during the pandemic year, and right before the pandemic, we had germination, but the raccoons messed up with the pots, and we were not present mostly because of the pandemic in the spring, and so anyway, that fell through the cracks, and we gave it a try. This year, we collected the seed last year in October at Mattawoman Creek with a permit from the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. And then here's the seed. So what we have done is scarification using Dremel and soaking in water. Those seeds were at least a month in water, changing the water every day or every other day. And we are doing two things. Planting the sprouted seed and non-sprouted seed in groups of 3 in coconut fiber packets in the tidal marsh. As you can see, Nora from Action and my coworker Jenny Hudson holding packets. So we plant those packets, and we're also growing them in a nursery wetbed. And today was a very special day because this morning when I checked the wetbed, which we have at Bladensburg Waterfront Park in partnership with the PG Parks, the seedlings had leafed out, which is amazing to see. So it's going pretty well, and we will continue in the next 2 years propagating this amazing species. American lotus and the Lombolutia used to be abundant in the Anacostia River. There's old pictures. There's an old picture from Paul Bartsch, which was a German-American naturalist. It was from the early 1900s, and you can see all the lotus in the background in the Kenilworth area. And if you've been to Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, there's also some paintings from the owner of the ponds back in the day in the 1930s. So it has also a lot of importance culturally for Native Americans. The rhizomes, the seeds and leaves and different parts of the plant were consumed, and they are edible, of course. And these species had been declining. So in a lot of the neighboring states, it's either considered vulnerable or imperiled. It has been declining for different reasons. So what's the future of the tidal Anacostia wetlands? So resident Canada geese population so far again is good. It's at a very low levels, which has helped the marshes to thrive. But what's going to happen with different administration and government changes? Are they going to stop? Is the USDA going to stop controlling the population? That's a big question mark. One good thing is that the water quality has been improving in the Anacostia River. There's been some fluctuations in the river report card that we do that is based on our water quality monitoring, but the overall trend is of improvement, to the point that our partner organization, the Anacostia River Keeper, was planning for a splash event. It didn't happen due to rainy weather, but now we're talking about swimming in the Anacostia River. So the conversation has started. And there's also an increase in underwater grasses. Mostly hydrilla, I would say, which is not the best news, but by talking to aquatic ecologists, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because hydrilla in some cases help jumpstart populations of the native species. They have observed that pattern in other areas. So we'll see what happens. Again, so far it's a lot of hydrilla, but we do see other species. We have propagated wild celery. We don't do it. We haven't done it in the last few years, but we did it in the past successfully. And some other people are doing the same. The District Department of Energy and Environment and the George Mason University are currently propagating wild celery at 2 or 3 spots in the Anacostia River. So will we see more wetland restoration and protection by the DC government? Again, with the political cycles, we're now seeing proposals of budget cuts and all that. So that's not great news for restoration and conservation. And the elephant in the room is sea level rise. That's why we want to do monitoring. I'm currently thinking about a community-based, like citizen science, ideally iNaturalist-based marsh vegetation monitoring to help pinpoint areas where we see that sea level rise is having an impact on plant communities. And again, that's still in the early stages, starting to cook, but that's something that I want to do with the help of community scientists going forward. Help us monitor the tidal marshes at Kingman Lake. And then what about Phragmites and other invasives? As you know, that's always a threat. Phragmites has definitely been increasing in abundance in the last, I've been in the river for 16 years at the Anacostia Watershed Society, and I've definitely seen increased. And I'd say particularly in the last 7 years, give or take. And there's other invasives, you know, we have yellow iris, and you know, in our era of e-commerce, there's always new invasives popping up. During one of our BioBlitz events that we identify species using iNaturalist, someone observed a Salvinia minima, which is a little tiny floating plant that came from a wetland nursery from Florida, and it has potential to spread in this area. The good news is that we reported it in the National Park Service. This was at Kenilworth Aquatic Gardens, and the National Park Service took care of it. It was an isolated case, but the reality is that we're going to continue getting a lot of new non-natives and invasives. All right, thank you very much, and I'll take questions.
Thank you so much, Jorge. That was an amazing presentation. I'm always impressed by the amount of work y'all get done along the Anacostia River. And I think we all got a really good botany lesson too on the species that exist within our watersheds. Lots of things to look for, and
Thank you.
hopefully we get to see some of these on our field trip on August 16th. I know I try to answer a couple of questions or at least give some of my thoughts just from my experience in ecological restoration as well, Jorge. But someone did ask an interesting question about the American lotus, which has in some areas does have a potential to be to spread a lot. And I was curious if there's like, would there be any worry of American lotus like outcompeting some of the other native species that you're trying to restore within the Anacostia watershed? Maybe some species that are a little more sensitive to certain growing conditions.
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, we have seen the opposite with the wild rice expansion. So there's currently 4 to 5 populations of American lotus in the river. And again, it used to thrive based on the historic references and photos. All those 4 or 5 populations have been planted either by National Park Service, mostly National Park Service actually. And one population at Kingman Marsh, actually the nice flower that I showed, it thrived for many years, but now you can tell that it's struggling with the wild rice. So it has shifted the distribution. Now it's kind of moving towards the edge. It's being pushed out by the wild rice, interestingly. So what we're doing in the new plantings at River Terrace is not plant the two together to avoid that situation. And again, we don't know what can be the impact going forward. Again, lotus tends to like low marsh, so it's only going to compete with the species that like the same habitat, like wild rice. And so the impact is going to be limited to that section or gradient of the marsh.
First of all, thanks for an outstanding presentation. That was incredible. Really learned a lot. But I wondered if you could elaborate on the what you mentioned about sea level rise. And I'm wondering how salt tolerant the wild rice is, and if you could add in there the relative to Phragmites. It seems like Phragmites is so widespread, it's hard to imagine being able to battle it.
And you mean the impact of sea level rise on both wild rice and Phragmites?
Yeah, I mean, will it affect one more than the other?
Yeah, so again, Phragmites prefers the high marsh areas. That's why sometimes you even see it in roadsides. If you get wet spots on the roadside, it can grow there. So unfortunately, the wild rice will be affected first by sea level rise because it occurs in the lower marsh area, mid to low marsh. So that's an area that will get affected first. And here in the mid-Atlantic, the sea level rise is going pretty fast, not only, well, in the world, all over the world, but because like the land subsidence, like the land is sinking, and so the effect is one of the fastest growing in the world, actually. And I've seen anecdotally some places, for example, at Kenilworth Lake, we have some little islands that used to be consistently above the mean high water line in the past, and now they are mostly underwater. Again, this is more nuanced, and it may or may not be, but it's potentially or very likely that is a sea level rise. So the sea level rise is going to affect the configuration and the distribution of these marshes in the future. While we're seeing now an expansion of wild rice, the most likely scenario in the next 50 years is that is going to shrink, unfortunately, because what happens when sea level rise with sea level rise is the wetland migration. So the plant species start migrating into the upland, but we're talking about we're in a city in DC. There's only so much area where the plants can migrate. So this is gonna be a big impact, to the point that I suggested, and I might do the same for the lotus, that DC lists wild rice as a species of greatest conservation need. Even though it's pretty abundant in our region, when you look only in DC, it's only found in the Anacostia River, mostly found in the Anacostia River. And when you put the sea level rise into the equation, it might not be here for too long. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Tiger, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Hi, I have a question about threshing rice. We grew some upland rice a couple of years ago in our demo garden, and it grew like crazy, but we couldn't get the rice grain out of the plant to save our souls. We beat it with rocks, we drove over it with our cars, we did everything we could think of. What is a good resource to teach me how to thresh rice?
Sorry, what do you mean by trashing rice? You mean like the method of...
Getting the rice grains out of the plant to cook.
Oh, yeah. That, like, for the harvest. Honestly,
Yes.
honestly, I haven't used that technique, which looks pretty cool. That's what they do in the Midwest with the canoes. What we do is mostly bagging the panicles. Why is that? Because we don't want any birds to eat that seed. And again, what we collect is just a tiny fraction of what the rice produces.
Oh,
Another,
okay.
yeah. But yeah, unfortunately, no, I haven't done the trashing. But that's a traditional Native American technique that I guess it would be great for when you do it for consumption purposes.
I guess I'll have to go to Minnesota.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Alex, you see you have a hand raised.
Yes, hello. I was wondering, you mentioned at the start that this wild rice species acts as a keystone species, and if you would mind explaining more about how it functions as a keystone species?
Yeah, it use in this kind of tidal freshwater wetlands, it tends to be a dominant species in terms of biomass. And because it's an annual plant, it's very productive, and a lot of species use it. One of the most remarkable one is the red-winged blackbirds. But we see muskrats eating the vegetative parts, the culms, and during the tidal fluxes, like high tide is used by many organisms like fish, swim around it, and so it is a very important species, also for rail, Sora rail, to the point that there have been some observations. I saw one like 3 years ago or so, and the DC ornithologist Dan Rauch, he has been observing them in the last couple of years as well, or hearing them, because they are hard to see. The only reason I saw one, it was I was doing a vegetation monitoring, and I saw it between the thick vegetation. But yeah, a lot of species depend on it, and it used to be a very abundant species naturally. Hopefully that answers your question.
Dave Bender asks, has planting wild rice brought back any threatened fish that feed on?
Not that I know of. That's a good question. Again, the wild rice is great habitat for fish during the high tides, and but no, I don't know of a specific case with the fish species coming back.
Lisa Cooter asks, what does Z aquatica taste like, and is it available for purchase for culinary use?
Yeah, honestly, I haven't tasted it, and I'm kind of ashamed of saying this because I've been working on it for many years. Although in the Anacostia River, it wouldn't be safe to eat it because you don't know what kind of toxics it may have. It's not like the whole riverbed of the Anacostia is going to be full of toxic. It doesn't work that way, but it might be spotty. But even though, I don't want to take any chances, but I don't think you can buy it. I haven't heard. Again, all that you can buy is Zizania palustris. I don't know, maybe in Native American communities in Wisconsin or Minnesota, where both species occur, you might be able to get Zizania aquatica, but not anywhere local, I think.
EJ Scarufi asks, I guess the question is, does eastern wild rice absorb arsenic?
I don't know specifically what type of, but probably, yeah, most likely, because that happens with the regular rice. So I would think so.
Norman Logan asks, what is the reason and or benefit for the male parts of the flower being below the female parts?
Interesting. Yeah, I think because of their coloration, that yellowish green coloration is the showiest part of the plant, and it does attract a lot of pollinators. And actually, I've been surprised, and I reported to the DC government the person in charge of beekeeping, because I always see a lot of Western honeybees, like the domestic bees love it. So during the blooming season, we see a lot of honeybees visiting the male flowers. So again, it's pollinator perhaps attraction, although it's mostly wind pollinated. So but there's something going on because the flowers are showy and they are definitely attracting pollinators. So there's got to be some sort of advantage.
I think just to add on to that, I wouldn't expect wild rice to be a really popular pollinator plant. That's interesting to hear. But I do think another reason that female flowers are typically above a male flowers on a plant when they occur separately is to reduce the likelihood of self-pollination and to encourage cross-pollination so that you have an increased genetic diversity within the population.
Right.
So you're not being like, you have the pollen from your own plant impeding on pollination within like I said, within the population.
A follow-up on the question about threshing. Lauren Hubbard found a tutorial on Google that suggests heating the harvest to get the hulls off. Thank you, Lauren.
Yep, thank you.
Lauren also added that male flowers are above the female flowers in the ZMA's family. So I guess it's not a hard rule. There's lots of exceptions, of course. Thank you so much.
Yes, excellent presentation. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you. And again, thanks for the invitation. Always happy to partner with the Maryland Native Plant Society.